everyone. After the training on September 3rd and the feedback that we received from everyone, Jeff and I thought that what we could do is go through these resources to give you an idea of what a model lesson might look like, given everything that you see here. So I accessed this document from my classroom. So I went into the classroom. So I use my waffle here. I go into the classroom. Now I'm going to go to second grade. Now your classroom here may look different than mine because I may have different classes available to me. So I'm going to find my grade 2 curriculum. Once I'm in here, I'm going to go to classwork. And then from classwork, I can navigate here on the margins to science as my table of contents, or I can scroll down to science. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down to science. And when I get there, I can see that I have the second grade science resources for remote learning. When I'm in this material, here is the slide deck that will bring me to all of the resources that Jeff and I compiled for you to use for your remote learning lessons. Remembering this first page has this key, which tells us if that activity could be used for collaboration. Maybe you're trying to fill a niche of dialogue in your remote learning classroom. You might look for an activity that has dialogue and so on. Here again are their standards. We've broken them down for you. And here are the frameworks as they're written by the state of Massachusetts. Now, this is really the slides that we want to be looking for. And these are what we're calling our fully developed resources. I'm going to name that and just be as transparent as possible here. So what I'm going to do as a teacher is I might look at some of these fully developed resources, and I might use some of them to make my 45-minute lesson that I might do twice a week with students. So if I'm doing second grade and I'm doing this standard, which is identifying and comparing living things, I'm going to start with a synchronous activity. So I have my students in front of me on my Google Meet or my Zoom, and I'm deciding that, you know what, I'm going to start with a Padlet. These are fully developed resources. You can just take this Padlet and make a copy of it if you wanted to and share it with your students. So here I am. I have my second graders in front of me on a Zoom. I've shared this link with them through the Google Classroom. So they just click on the link and here they are in this Padlet with me. Now it says, what's living in your neighborhood? List all the plants and animals you can find outside your house. So all the students need to do is go ahead down here to this plus button and hit plus. And what they'll be able to do is you'll see add a comment. Now they can type it. I could start by typing my name. And I have a duck. Oops. There we go. I have a duck and a squirrel. However, Padlet is great because it allows for students that need a little more accessibility to hit this more options button here. 3 dots, always more options. I can go ahead here to voice, and I can just record my answer. Let's watch. I see a squirrel and a duck and a pine tree outside my house. I go ahead, play back and save. Let's see if it sounds good. I see a squirrel and a duck and a pine tree outside my house. I like that, so I'm going to go ahead and click save. Now what you can see is that this audio recording is going to automatically show up here in my Padlet. So students could listen to each other. I see squirrels and fish and ducks outside. Or they could read what each other have wrote. Now, the great thing here is that this also has another function in Padlet. So let's say I wanted to use this as a true-false statement. So students, I spelled squirrel wrong. I can't have that. Students, do you think that a squirrel is an animal? If you do think a squirrel is an animal, I want you to turn your box green. If you don't think a squirrel is an animal, then I want you to turn your box red. And so what they could do is come right up here to these 3 buttons and say, oh, a squirrel is an animal, so I'm going to keep my box green. And this is a great formative assessment check-in for teachers to see with all the whole class who is able to see that the squirrel is in fact an animal with a green. So again, this is my first thing I'm going to do with students. I'm face-to-face. Let's say this took about 10 minutes to get through. That might be my synchronous activity with students. I might decide that now they're ready to go ahead and do some asynchronous learning. So I'm going to send them off on their own. I'm going to say, okay, today you're going to be learning about animals and plants and whether or not we think they're living things and how we compare them. You could send them to the Generation Genius. We talked about this in the training. Here's an example of how you might give them the asynchronous activity. Or maybe you'll send them to this interactive. Again, this is just one activity that they'll do while they're asynchronous with you. So they started doing off this Padlet with you, then you sent them off to do this Generation Genius. Let's say that took them about 25 minutes. Now it's time to bring them back to class. So in my 45-minute block, I start with a Padlet. I send them off to do some content delivery with Generation Genius. I'm checking in with students individually as I go. Now I bring them back all together again. And in this class, I might say, okay, now we're going to do card sorts to see how well you understand the difference of how we compare living things. I would go ahead and I would share this in my Google Classroom so that each student gets their own copy. And that way they're going to be able to do this individually, but they can do it live with you. And you can see exactly what they're doing. So this is a drag and drop. Different animals live in different types. Drag the animal from the 2 pages into the habitat they live in. So I'm going to say, okay, this is definitely aquatic. I'm going to bring him here, and so on. This is one example lesson that I might use with my 2nd grade students. And you can see we only used 1, 2, 3 of the examples that Jeff and I provided for a 45-minute lesson. You have 5 weeks to do this whole standard. So what we're asking is that you collaborate as teachers and add in your fully developed resources as comments so that we can all help build this library. And we don't have to create all of our own from these links. How we do that? We go ahead and we insert a comment. We make sure that we say what standard it's addressing. So I might say comparing plants. Ooh, excuse me. Comparing plants. Then I would go ahead and I would say this is going to use Google Slides, so the tool that I'm using. And then I would say that it's going to be for modeling. And I would go ahead here and paste my link to my fully developed resource so that someone else in the district can go ahead, file, make a copy, and share it with their students. The more that we collaborate, the less we have to build on our own. I hope this helps with an example of a model lesson. Remember synchronous, on to asynchronous, and back to synchronous. All right, guys, enjoy your afternoon.